am Beth Finch. I'm the Marketing and Communication Specialist at MPG, joining Dr. Caroline Harvey, and she's presenting this evening on how to support anxious children and being brave.
Okay, there we go.
Great. MPG has an office on the Upper West Side at West 82nd Street near Columbus Avenue. We've been on the Upper West Side since 2011. We are a multidisciplinary team, which means we have both adult and child and adolescent psychologists on staff, as well as neuropsychologists, board-certified behavior analysts, and special educators. So we really have the breadth and experience and expertise between our different positions to support a wide variety of child and adolescent needs. We offer wraparound care, which means we do provide mental health services, including therapeutic services and groups, as well as neuropsychological testing for everything from autism to ADHD to some learning challenges your child may be experiencing. We also provide ABA services and behavioral and educational services. So that would include executive functioning, coaching, and tutoring, and those type of services. The next bullet goes over some of our specific services. I won't tap into everything we do because we do cover a lot of support for children and adolescents, but some I'd like to highlight are CBT, parent-child interaction therapy, which supports parents and sort of building that parent-child relationship and improving the child behavior through support with the parents. We offer space groups, which are actually groups for parents of children with anxiety and helping give them the tools to better support their children. We have social skills groups that meet on the Upper West Side, aforementioned neuropsychological testing. We also provide support for school refusal for children who are too anxious or have other difficulties and either want to avoid school or refuse to go to school altogether. We also have support for selective mutism, which are children who maybe are able to speak with certain family members or in certain settings, but they really struggle to speak in other settings. And again, often the root of that is anxiety. We can provide virtual support as well as services in our Upper West Side office and our satellite office in Long Island City. And we do provide services in office settings, school settings, other community settings at home, really depending on the need of the child or adolescent, we can provide that level of support. Our vision is to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered. And our mission is to provide multidisciplinary, integrated support for individuals and their families who experience mental health, behavioral, and educational challenges. And without further ado, our speaker this evening is Dr. Caroline Harvey. She's a child, adolescent, and family psychologist at MPG, and she specializes in treatment for oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, selective mutism, and other childhood anxiety disorders. She leads our teen social anxiety group and provides a lot of support for children with anxiety. So she has a lot of experience and is very well equipped to speak to you this evening on how to support anxious children and being brave. And she does work with a lot of parents as well. So I will pass it over to Dr. Harvey now. And as I mentioned during her presentation, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will reserve time at the end for questions. I also wanted to mention we are recording this webinar, and we will provide the link to you all afterwards. So if you want to rewatch it or have access to the slides, you can do so. And we also have our contact information at the very end. So if you want to reach out to me or Dr. Harvey or the practice with any additional questions, feel free to call us or email us. Dr. Harvey, take it away.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you all for the parents and maybe even some teachers in attendance today. And welcome to this webinar on how to support anxious children and adolescents in being brave. As Beth was talking about, some of my favorite work is to work directly with parents, whether it be in terms of learning some tools of how to better manage their kids' misbehaviors or how to help their children build distress tolerance in feared situations. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today, and hopefully you'll have something to take away from today's experience. So let's dive in. So to help set the stage for today's topic, I'm going to start with a really quick crash course on anxiety. So what is this thing called anxiety? Anxiety is one of the countless emotions that we experience in our day-to-day lives. The American Psychiatric Association defines anxiety as the anticipation of future threat. And I often refer to anxiety as our body's internal alarm system, which will alert us to any potential dangers in our world. Anxiety in and of itself is not a bad thing. It really functions to help us keep safe from any threats and to help ensure our survival as a human race. However, it can become problematic when we experience excess false alarms. So essentially, when our anxiety is getting triggered constantly, despite our not being in the presence of any dangers. So there are three ways that we as psychologists typically talk about how anxiety plays out in humans. So typically we experience anxious thoughts, anxious sensations in our body, and we engage in a range of behaviors when we are feeling anxious. And our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, they're all connected to each other. They each have a drastic effect on whether we heighten our anxiety in certain situations, or they can, in conjunction, help us to calm ourselves down and to think more rationally. So let's explore this in a bit more detail. So when it comes to physical sensations associated with anxiety, no two people are alike. We all experience unique sensations when it comes to how our body reacts to anxiety. Some of the common physical symptoms of anxiety are listed here. So body and muscle tension, increased heart rate, breathing quickly, having stomach aches or nausea or butterflies or knots in their belly. Actually, a friend of mine described it this weekend as kind of like bubbles in their belly. So everyone really experiences this very differently. Trembling, sweating. Some other sensations that are not listed here include dizziness, headaches, pain or tightness in your chest, blushing in your face or your neck or your chest, or even feeling faint. The list goes on and on and on, and it's really unique to every individual. When it comes to our thoughts, there are a few themes that generally come up when it comes to anxiety. So first are worried thoughts. This is when we generally anticipate an unwanted stressor to occur. So for example, one person might think they're all going to laugh at me. So we're expecting something we don't want to happen or something bad to happen. Sometimes our anxiety takes it to the next level, though. So we might expect the worst case scenario to occur. So a student might be thinking, what if I forget everything I studied for the exam? Unlikely, but our anxiety can take it to a more drastic or almost irrational place as well. And our anxious thoughts can also involve setting unrealistic expectations for ourselves. So an example of this might be, I'm going to disappoint my teacher if I get one answer wrong. So there really are a variety of ways that our anxiety can really affect how we're going to think in certain situations. And when it comes to behavior, again, a few themes tend to emerge here. By and large, anxious children, teens, and adults, we tend to avoid or stay away from situations that will trigger that anxiety or those uncomfortable feelings for them. So some children might be a chatterbox at home, but once they're in the presence of familiar friends and family, they might go silent in those situations. Or someone who's fearful of small spaces or elevators might opt to choose the stairs whenever they are available. Or if they're frightened by big dogs, they might cross the street whenever they see a big or a little dog walking towards them. So these are all examples of ways that we might avoid fearful situations. Another anxious behavior is over-preparing for a future stressor. So for young kids, this can look like asking parents excess questions about an upcoming vacation, of where they're going, when we'll get there, what you're going to do once you're there. So really over-preparing. And with teens, this might look like studying for hours and hours and hours, even if they're already at the top of their class. And finally, some people might engage in a very specific ritual, to prevent a feared stressor from taking place. So for example, we might see this if a child is engaging in a very rigid morning routine to ensure that nobody gets harmed on the way to school. So again, this is where anxiety can take it to a place of irrationality, that we are doing something to prevent something that seems totally unrelated from taking place. It's important to know that with children and adolescents, their attempts to avoid feared situations is their solution to this problem. If they're fearful, like let's say if a young child is fearful of being away from their parent, they are going to do whatever they can do to avoid that uncomfortable feeling of being away from them. So for some children, this might be clinging to their parent, crying or screaming. And this avoidant behavior can really help to reduce their anxiety in the short term. So with this separation anxiety that I'm hitting on, clinging to a parent is going to give them access to that parent for a longer period of time and momentarily prevent their parent from dropping them off at school or dropping them off at a play date. However, if these behaviors that they're engaging in are effective in avoiding the feared situation time and time again, it's actually going to strengthen that fear and strengthen that anxiety. So let's go through this in more detail with a specific example. Many of the children I work with experience anxiety when they have to speak in front of the class. So imagine this scenario. The teacher asks them a question in front of the class. This triggers anxiety for the child, and they might be worried, what if I get the answer wrong? And this thought might cause their heart to start racing, their hands start trembling. And because of this spike in their physical sensations of anxiety, they actually freeze and avoid answering. Generally, when we see children in distress, us as adults also experience a spike in our anxiety. So what does our anxiety cause us to do? Usually we jump in and rescue that child. So the teacher in this situation might remove the expectation that the student needs to answer, and they might skip to the next student that might have their hand raised. So this action will actually result in a short-term reduction in both the student's anxiety and the teacher's anxiety, because the trigger to both the student and the teacher's anxiety has been removed. They both got through that awkward, stressful, intense situation. But what ends up happening is that that student will likely repeat that behavior in the future to avoid speaking in class. And they might continue to rely on their teacher to rescue them when they're in distress. And this actually will maintain the symptoms of anxiety. So we call this negative reinforcement. So for the behaviorists out there, negative refers to the removal of an unwanted stressor. So in this situation, we removed the expectation of talking in front of the class. And reinforcement refers to the likelihood that this behavior, this cycle will repeat itself, since the removal of stress helps everyone to feel better in the short term. However, this is just one instance. Imagine how many times this child has successfully avoided speaking in front of the whole class. The more that they avoid it, the more intense that fear will grow in the long run. Meaning the next time the teacher calls on them, that anxiety is actually going to feel more intense because they never got to see the other side of it and see that maybe speaking in front of the class isn't as scary as it initially seemed. So, in a nutshell, this vicious cycle demonstrates that well-intentioned adults can totally inadvertently strengthen children and adolescents' anxiety by removing that stressor causing anxiety rather than letting them sit with that discomfort. Okay, so now that we got through that crash course in anxiety, let's transition to discussing how caregivers can play a role in their child or their adolescent's anxiety. Okay, so if you are a parent or a caregiver of a child or a teen with a history of anxiety, you've probably experienced times in which you felt torn of how to handle situations, fearful situations. You may have thought to yourself, this is terrifying for them. Should I rescue them from their fears? Or their peers can do it. Should I just push them to face their fears? If either of these thoughts resonate with you, you're not alone. And for those of you who fall in line with my thought bubble on the left, my next slide is for you. So research has found that all mammals' brains are actually hardwired to protect and rescue their youth. We aren't born with these basic skills and tools required for survival. In fact, young mammals are terrible at ensuring their own safety and ensuring that their needs are met and self-soothing. So naturally, we rely on our parents to do these things for us. So mammal parents are actually extremely attuned to their child's fear cues. So when in fear, children are incredibly skilled at drawing their parents in. And their parents, in turn, will immediately respond to these cues and help their young one to regulate, help them to feel calm. Here we go. So for this reason, supporting children through anxious situations is not intuitive. In fact, we frequently work with families where parents and caregivers fundamentally disagree in this area, where one parent or one caregiver might feel the need to relieve their child's distress and help them avoid feared situation. We call this protective parenting. While the other parent may feel that their child just needs to be more independent and get over it. We call this demanding parenting. The good news is that both of these seemingly opposite perspectives are correct. In fact, the key to promoting bravery in anxious youth is to combine both protective and demanding parenting perspectives. Dr. Eli Leibowitz, professor and clinical psychologist at Yale Child Studies Center, calls this approach supportive parenting. So one way parents can articulate this kind of support to their child is by using what Dr. Leibowitz calls a supportive statement. So supportive statements have two main ingredients. We want to accept and validate the child's fearful experience and simultaneously exude confidence that the child can withstand slightly more discomfort than they have up until this point. So here are some examples of supportive statements. It frightened you, but I know you'll be okay. My job is to help you build your independence. It may be difficult, and I'm confident you can manage it with practice. So there's no single right or wrong supportive statement. It's really about combining that validation and that confidence and having it fit for that particular situation. So let's practice coming up with supportive statements together. So there is some audience participation here. I'm going to provide 3 quotes, one at a time. And for each one, I want you to type into the chat whether the quote would fall under protective or demanding parenting. And then after we've decided which side it falls on, I want to see if you can rephrase it into a supportive statement. So like I said before, there's no one right answer here. As long as you combine both the validation and the confidence, you are correct. So let's see where we start with here. Okay, so the first one is she can't handle it. So let me open up my chat box here. Do we think that this
chat? Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Dr. Harvey, but I was going to say the chat is open to everyone, so feel free to drop your answer in there.
Perfect. So is this protective or demanding parenting? She can't handle it. So I see one person put in protective. And I'm seeing a few more protective pieces coming in. So you are correct. This is protective parenting. So who's brave enough to take a stab at a supportive statement? Oh, I'm seeing them flying in. You can do it, and I'm here to support you. I know it's really difficult, but I'm confident you can do it. It's hard for you, but I think you can do it. So in those last 2, I love that you combined both elements, that we're acknowledging how difficult this is for them, and we have the confidence they can do it. This is hard and you can do hard things. Love that one, Abby. Excellent. So you guys are getting it already. Beautiful job redirecting that. Let's see what I came up with. It may be tough, but she can get through it. So you could see we're all thinking very similarly here. Beautiful supportive statements. Let's move along to the next one. Come on, this isn't that scary. Protective or demanding? Demanding. Excellent. So you guys are seeing the discrepancy here. This is demanding parenting. And how might you turn this into a supportive statement? It might be scary, but we're all here to support you. I see it scared you, but I will walk you through it. I can understand how you think it is scary, and we are here for you. Beautiful supportive statements, everyone. You are doing a beautiful job of acknowledging how they're feeling. And I also like the emphasis that you are there to help them through it. Perfect. I see you feel scared, but I will help you through it. Excellent job, guys. So I know that you can do scary things with some practice. Okay, last one. She needs my protection. Protective or demanding. Excellent. We've got 1 vote for protective already. 2 votes for protective. I guess the word is right in there. She needs my protection. So this one's a little bit more straightforward. And any stabs for a supportive statement? You guys are on it already. Love how quickly you're learning. And love how brave you guys are putting your answers in the chat. You look worried. I will help you if you need it. So acknowledging the worried feelings and your willingness to help. So I think you guys have the gist of it. And the ones that we're going through right now, they're more vague. We're going to talk about ways to make this more specific in a moment. So I'm here to help you build your brave muscles, might be something I'd say to a little one. Okay, perfect. So you can see these supportive statements, sometimes it includes it they all have validation and confidence, but sometimes it's more about talking about your role as their parent, as their caregiver, that we're not here necessarily to protect them or rescue them from all the things that scare them, but we're here to help them be more independent, and help them build their distress tolerance, really. Okay. I don't think we're doing polls here, but just to test your knowledge, I guess you could put it in the chat if you would like. True or false, well-intentioned adults and caregivers can help children overcome their anxiety by protecting them from being in stressful situations. So we have 1 vote for true, 1 vote for false, 50-50 here. And I'm seeing a few more falses come through. So yes, this one is a false. It's a little bit deceiving as it starts, but our role here is not to protect them from being in anxious or stressful situations, but the opposite, that stress is a part of life and we want to help them get through it with our support. So yes, that one is a false. And our second one here, select the best supportive statement from below. So I'll let you guys take your time as you read through it. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of C's come in. Excellent. So yes, C is the correct one here. It combines the validation and the encouragement. This might feel a bit scary at first, but I know it will get easier with practice. Okay, love how everyone's paying close attention here. I'm closing the chat so we can move on. Oh, and there are your answers, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so moving on to the final piece of today's webinar, how can parents and caregivers build bravery through exposures? Okay, so this brings us back to the negative reinforcement cycle of anxiety that we reviewed earlier. So the key to building bravery is to interrupt this vicious cycle here. When parents and caregivers take the supportive stance we've been discussing and simultaneously refrain from rescuing children from feared situations, children will learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and they will learn to build their distress tolerance. So what is this thing called exposures? Exposures are when we practice approaching situations that trigger fear, anxiety, or any kind of discomfort for us. And we're not just doing this one time, but many times with repeated practice, because that will help children to increase their distress tolerance, build bravery in the face of their fears, boost their confidence and self-esteem, and just better cope with those uncomfortable feelings of anxiety. However, it is important to keep in mind that these positive changes, they don't happen overnight. They require time, patience, and lots of practice. The key to exposures is to take small steps that gradually increase in difficulty. And starting with practicing areas of low anxiety practicing areas of low anxiety and getting more and more comfortable with this area with repeated practice before going up the ladder. So before targeting areas of moderate anxiety and ultimately practicing areas of high anxiety. Oops, I clicked too quickly. Okay, so keep in mind that every child who suffers from anxiety, they are unique. So some kids will call for more support or smaller steps or more practice than others. So I do want to emphasize here, especially for this final part of today's webinar, that consulting with a licensed clinician who specializes in treating anxiety is really going to help you come up with the best plan for your child's specific set of needs. So I thought I would end today's webinar with some examples of low, medium, and high level exposures, as well as some individualized supportive statements for 3 anxious behaviors. Again, I want to caution you that if your child struggles with any of these examples, the listed exposures may not be appropriate for your child. Again, no 2 kids are alike, and every child will need to proceed with exposures at their own pace to best set them up for success. So with that said, our first example covers reassurance seeking. So as a reminder, reassurance seeking is when children or adolescents ask repeated questions or frequently check in with their parents regarding whatever their worries are. So for some kids, they might ask the same question over and over and over again, even if you just answered it. So for example, if kids are worried about making a mistake, they might ask, did I do something wrong? Like over and over and over again. Whereas other kids might ask an excess number of questions about a specific topic. So for example, if they're anxious about a new babysitter coming over, they might ask, like, which babysitter is coming? What time? What time will you be back? Will you be putting me to bed? What if I need you? Will you pick up the phone if I call, if I text, et cetera, et cetera. So those are 2 different examples of reassurance seeking. Okay, we just clicked ahead. There we go. So one potential exposure parents and caregivers might do is putting a limit on how many questions they will answer in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. So some kids might tolerate starting with 3 answers in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening for a low-level exposure. And then maybe proceeding to 1 answer in a mid-level exposure, or ultimately 0 answers for a high-level exposure. Another option is to put a limit on how many times a parent will ask repeated questions. So maybe you're starting with giving them 3 answers to the same question, and then decreasing ultimately to 0 answers in terms of a long-term goal. And then in terms of a potential supportive statement, I know it bothers you when you're unsure if you did something wrong, but I'm confident you can handle not knowing. So you could see we can use a more non-specific supportive statement like the ones you beautifully generated earlier in the chat. I like to make them more specific when we can. It does require a little bit of thinking ahead of time of how you want to phrase it. Because again, when it comes to treating anxiety and when it comes to supportive parenting and supportive statements, this does not come to us intuitively. It does take a little bit of time to think, how do I want to word this? Okay, so that's our first example. I'm just keeping an eye on time. Okay, great. So our second example covers going mute when in the presence of strangers. So this might be wait staff at a restaurant, the cashier at a grocery store, or an Uber driver. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, each child's starting point for exposures in this area is going to greatly vary. So imagine the stranger asking, what's that stuffed animal you've got on your lap? One parent might start by repeating the question and supporting the child in answering the parent in front of the stranger. Once the kiddo has had repeated success with this, the parent might kick it up a notch, supporting their child and providing a 1-word answer to the stranger. So maybe the kiddo is just expected to say lion. A good long-term goal or a good high-level exposure would be to support their child in answering the stranger with a full sentence. So maybe kiddo is expected to say, its name is Simba. And a good supportive statement for this is, talking to strangers can be scary, and I'm 100% confident you can start by speaking to me in front of the ice cream man. So again, this is where one kid might be starting, but we might need to provide a lot more support and practice or take even smaller steps with some kids. And other kids might be able to start with the medium level exposure. Okay, and finally, some kiddos have very rigid and lengthy bedtime routines. They might prefer certain scripts be said between the parent and child at specific times. They might prefer that certain tasks like brushing their teeth, putting on their pajamas, reading a book are done in a specific order. So parents might start by targeting flexibility and changing the order in which certain tasks are done. They might increase the difficulty by reducing the amount of time they spend laying down with the child while they are falling asleep. And finally, parents might work their way up to giving quick goodnight hugs and kisses and immediately leaving the room, allowing the child to fall asleep independently. I guess before I display the supportive statement that I came up with, I wonder if we have any brave volunteers to write a more specific supportive statement here. It could be for any level of the exposure, or you can be creative and do something much different. This is where it takes a little bit of thinking. And even I have to sit sometimes in sessions with parents and think, how do I want to word this? I could even use a supportive statement in this situation. It could be scary to volunteer information in a chat. And you've done it before, so I know you could do it again. Love the reference to today's webinar, Abby. I know you like eating dinner before bath, but we're going to do bath first tonight so I can join this webinar. I appreciate your brave supportive statement here. So yeah, love that you're acknowledging their preference for routines. I see another one here. I sometimes have a hard time going to bed and falling asleep, but we can create a bedtime ritual together and adjust it as we go along. So yeah, love that you are validating how difficult it is and that you are a participant in this, working together, and I see like adjusting it as you go along. So getting more and more flexible. Appreciate you, the brave volunteers today. Let's see, what did I come up with? It can be difficult to change our routine, but I'm sure you can practice being brave and flexible. So you could see there's no single one right way of doing this. I see a question. Can you give a reward? If you sleep in your bed all night long, you can watch TV in the morning. Yes, so I often use reinforcements in my work with families. It really depends on what approach you are using. So before we get to this poll, I am going to include a book reference here. So this, essentially what I've went through today comes from Eli Leibowitz's Space Treatment. And if you were listening to Beth's introduction, we do SPACE groups here. So SPACE stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And a lot of what I went through today is key pieces of SPACE treatment, where we are essentially treating anxiety through the parents. So when it comes to rewards, that is more behavioral treatment and reinforcement. And I would use rewards in that situation while also incorporating the supportive statement. Each kid is going to be different in terms of whether they require rewards or not, or if rewards are motivating for them or not. SPACE treatment, as I said, developed by Dr. Leibowitz, was developed for kids who were refusing to come into therapy. So it's just an alternative way to treat the anxiety through the parents. So I don't think you need rewards if you're taking a strict space approach. But if your child is incentivized by rewards or privileges, it doesn't always have to be something that costs money or something tangible. I do incorporate that into my work with kiddos. Okay, so that brings us to our last poll here. Exposures help to build distress tolerance, provide opportunities to face your fears, target low areas of anxiety before high areas, or all of the above. Yep, seeing lots of D's already. So beautiful job paying attention. And yes, it's just a beautiful way of summarizing everything that we have talked about today. So all of the above is the correct answer. So here is one of Dr. Leibowitz's books that are, the target audience is parents and teachers. So if you want to find out more about the supportive parenting approach and space, I highly recommend you look into this book. It's an easy read, free of jargon, and we'll go through countless examples of anxious behaviors and how well-intentioned adults can inadvertently reinforce their child's anxiety. Okay, and that brings us to my references. Thank you everyone for your participation today. I hope you're all walking away with a better understanding of the caregiver role in childhood anxiety and how you can support your loved ones in building bravery and building distress tolerance. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming this is a good time to stop the screen share.